A superb new documentary has found growing unrest over the level of immigration into Ireland. The Daily Telegraph filmed at a series of anti-immigration protests, and those who attended said they're unhappy with what they claim is a government open borders policy. I'm joined now in the Westminster studio by the man who made that documentary, Michael Murphy. Michael, thank you so much for coming in. And again, thank you for shining a light on people who oftentimes politically have no voice. And indeed, they're attacked. Leo Varadkar would call these people far right or fascist. But when you spoke to them, they're anything but.
No, they had very reasonable concerns about their communities being transformed, about their services being stretched too thin already, not needing to have an additional 1,000 or so asylum seekers, attending schools, hospitals, putting a strain on police, etc. So, yeah, it's a very different conversations that's had about this in the halls of power in Dublin and on the streets of deprived areas and cities and rural Ireland.
And when you look at some of the numbers, more than 26,000 asylum seekers over the past 2 years, a 200% increase since 2019. And yet, oftentimes when the locals raise legitimate concerns, as you highlight in your video, about safety, about overcrowding, about public services, they're simply swept aside as vile racists.
Yeah, so there's a playbook of either they're falling prey to misinformation, disinformation, it gets ratcheted up to they're far right or they're racist. I mean, it's nothing we haven't seen in this country before. And I think that, they've seen how it's panned out in Europe and Britain where, this conversation's been censored and they don't like where they're going.
And oftentimes, Michael, people who watch GBNews, I cover this story a lot in Ireland, and they say, what is it about the Irish? They specifically decided to say enough is enough. What is it about the Irish spirit? They are out on the streets. They've been out there for many, many weeks, if not months now, and they are saying enough is enough. What is it about the Irish that's made them rise up like this?
Well, there's two things. One, whereas the frog has been boiling in this country for about 70 years, as with other continental European countries. In Ireland, this has all happened in about 20. So it's happened at breakneck speed. Everybody is, disorientated by how quickly this has been forced through. There's also the fact that Ireland's history is different to Britain's. They were founded as an ethnically nationalist state, and they had an anti-colonial struggle against what they saw as an overweening empire, which in that instance was the British. Now they're starting to make parallels between European diktats on, say, mass migration or environmental regulations and a kind of colonial overbearingness that they associated with Britain. And a lot of the language you hear is, this is a new plantation.
And it's fascinating how you say this is the most volatile political landscape in Ireland since the Troubles. And indeed, we've seen arson attacks on the prospective sites for asylum seeker centres. We saw the streets burning, vehicles burning, buses, emergency vehicles burning in Dublin after a suspected migrant went on a stabbing rampage. And so this has happened very quickly and it's very volatile.
Yes, and I think if, any of your viewers are wondering where it's going to end up, you just have to look around the continent. You've got far-right parties or right-wing parties in the ascent in Austria, in France, in Poland, expected to storm ahead in the elections in June. And Ireland is looking like it's ripe for its own version of a populist revolt, as it were.
Yeah, and there's an excellent line that you end. And by the way, catch this video. It's on the Daily Telegraph website. Michael Murphy is the author. Please go and have a look. It's 15 minutes long. It's excellent. And it ends with the line, Ireland is a multiculturalist country ripe for a populist revolt. And that's precisely because the mainstream politicians, they're either sticking their hands over their ears, their heads in the sand, or outright they're attacking the people who dare to complain about this.
Yeah, so we hear a lot from politicians in Ireland that the Irish establishment are very concerned with how they appear from Europe. And I think maybe they should start thinking more about how Europe appears from Ireland. Ireland is a very successful, prosperous country, didn't really have a sort of existential stakes politics up until this immigration issue reared its head, especially in the last few years. And they'd probably do well to, look at Europe as a cautionary tale.
And we saw a brief clip there, Michael, of you speaking to some of the protesters, to concerned mothers in rural parts of Ireland, as well as on the outskirts and centre of Dublin. But what were people telling you? When you were up close and personal, what kind of personal anecdotes were you getting to crystallise the sheer frustration they're feeling?
Well, some women were saying that they didn't feel safe to leave the house alone. They didn't feel like they could take their children to parks or benches in the middle of town because gangs of asylum seekers tended to loiter there in groups of 10 or 15. We didn't see that in our documentary, but we heard it enough to grant it some credence. We heard that people are, finding it difficult to get hospital appointments. In Roscrea, if you call the police at night, it goes through to the next town, which is 20 minutes away. There's 7 policemen that work in that town. If you add in another 1,000 people, that's a serious strain. There's 33 children in some classes in Roscrea. Add 2 more children with language difficulties, and everyone's going to have to move at the pace of the slowest kid in the class. So there's a sense that the island hasn't got its house in order, so why are they trying to save the world?
And you talk about the potential for a political populist revolt, yet the mainstream political parties in Ireland, they all seem very on page, on message with the multicultural dream, with open borders, with the progressive liberal aspects. Is that creating a vacuum?
Yeah, so recent polling suggests that around a third of Irish voters would consider voting for an anti-immigrant party or candidate. Now, in the absence of that party, which doesn't exist, there is no Farageist type politics in Ireland, really. It looks like independent MPs are going to run and do very well on an anti-immigration platform. Now, the election is a year away. A lot can happen in between then and now. But they're fooling around with forces that may turf them out of government or lead to some kind of disastrous Sinn Féin coalition.
And we've already seen evidence of violence flaring up, of arson attacks, of open riots on the streets. And you just feel, Michael, that if you don't address this, then you create a vacuum which always gets filled, and it can get filled with the bad actors. Why can't they just democratically listen to the people?
Well, the Irish government are want to remind the Irish public about their international obligations. They cite, labyrinthine EU legislation about why they need to take asylum seekers. And, that's stoking some anti-EU sentiment. People don't feel like they're in control of their lives. Someone put it even stronger to me the other day. They said, communities across the country feel like they're on a hijacked vehicle and they don't like where it's going.
Superb stuff. As I say, that's an excellent documentary. Michael Murphy, it's on the Daily Telegraph website. Please check it out.